Hello guys, my name is Lucas and welcome. I took a short holiday last week, so that's why I haven't uploaded this part yet, but now it's here. So today we're going to be finalizing this 3 parts episode where we're going to finally be instantiating our items and populating their information accordingly. I have laid out the steps that we're going to take to do this. We're going to first implement the simple JSON file. Then we're going to replace the button that we use to show our items, and we're going to put that part of the function in our login if we have a success. After that, we're going to create an item controller to create items and control our items object. We're also going to create some callbacks to wait for our server's response. After that, we're going to create a loop to instantiate our items and populate their information with the information that we're going to create from a new function that we're going to use to download each item's information based on their ID. Before we begin, I want to deeply thank all of my subscribers and especially those of you who support me on Patreon. And if you would like to help me and make this Patreon list look a little bit bigger, remember that there is a link in the description of this video to my Patreon account where you can help me financially. That would mean the world to me. So now guys, let's begin with this video so that we can finish our backend for our games. So the first thing we're going to do is add simple JSON to our project. I am leaving the link in the description and we just want to copy all this code here. And we're going to paste it in a new script that we're going to create here in Unity. So create C# script and we call it simple JSON, like that. Now we open this. Now we're going to open this, select all and paste the code that we just copied. Now we have simple JSON in our project. It's going to be useful for us to parse and create arrays based on JSON strings. Now we're going to remove this button and put the functionality inside our login function. So just remove that. So the function of that button was to turn on our user profile. Now we're going to do it from our web script in our login function. So if we logged in correctly, we're going to take that game object and set it active. So first we need a reference to our user profile game object. We can create a game object reference in our main class so that we can access it from our public instance. So here I'm going to create a public game object user profile. Now we can turn on this game object directly from our web script here. So we do main.instance.userProfile. That's the game object that we want to turn on. And we just do .setActive to true. And down here, we want to turn off our login game object, because the login panel is here and it's going to keep showing. We already have a login script attached to this game object, and we have a reference to that from our main class, so we can use that as well and turn it off directly from our web script. So main.instance.login.gameObject.setActive false. And with that we can turn off our login script. However, we still have a little problem here. When we have wrong credentials or our user does not exist, we're not returning an HTTP error. We're actually returning a message. So we're still going to run this even though we couldn't log in. I really recommend that you should use HTTP errors and debug it here and stop this. However, for this case, we're just going to create an if statement. And we're going to see if our download handler text contains any of the error message that we gave ourselves. If we go to Visual Studio Code in our login file, we see that we echo wrong credentials or username does not exist respectively. So we're going to copy this and we're going to use it here. So our login.php file returns us a message depending if we had wrong credentials or our user did not exist. Those two messages should actually be HTTP errors so that we can stop our code here and we are not going to run any of these. But for this case, I'm going to simply do an if statement. So if our text here contains any of the errors that we made in our login.php file, which are these two, echo wrong credentials or echo username does not exist, if we have any of these two, we're not going to run this part of our code. So if the text that we get from our PHP script dot contains the message here, I'm gonna copy this, wrong credentials, or if the text, again, same function, contains the other message here, username does not exist, here, just gonna paste that. If either of those are true, so if we have any of those messages within our text, we're going to debug something like try again or something like that. And then else, that means we didn't have any of those error messages. We're going to do what we were supposed to do, turn on our user profile and turn off our login panel. Now, if we try to log in, we should see how our login panel turns off and our user profile turns on. Let's try that. So I'm going to play this. I already turned on XAMPP. So now if I type a test user, which is correct, but I type a wrong password, you see that wrong credentials, try again, and nothing happens. But if I log in successfully, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I log in, and assign reference exception, we haven't assigned the game object yet. I forgot to do that. So we have the user profile here. You see none because we haven't assigned it. So let's assign that first. Here, user profile, going to drag it there. And now play it one more time. Test user, going to type a wrong password first, log in, nothing happened. Now we do the right password, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and our user profile turned on, showing us our items. Nice. So that's the first part. Now let's create our items class. We're going to create an items C# script. I already created one, and we're going to add it inside our items parent. Here, I already added it. So the first thing we want to do here is create a function, public void, and let's call it create items. Here we need to create the items based on a JSON array that we're going to get from our web class. So our web class has this public enumerator get items IDs that is going to get all the items IDs based on a user ID. We already did that in the last episode, but now we need to somehow pass that information to our items class that we just created. How can we pass that JSON array inside here? For that, we're going to use a callback. So we're going to use an action to make a callback. So first we need to tell Unity that we're using the system library, system. So we're going to create an action, and this action can have a string as a parameter. That parameter is going to be passed from our web class, which is going to be the JSON array that we downloaded from our server. And this action is going to be called something like create items callback. Now we're going to define our create items callback here in our start function. So we just type create items callback is equals to, we're going to use a lambda expression like this. And we need to give a name to the string parameter that we asked for. So I'm just going to call it JSON array because that's what it is. It's a JSON array. And here we can set our function to create the items based on this JSON array. So before we keep writing this action, I'm going to create the function here. So this function, first of all, needs to call the enumerator from the web class. So main.instance.web get items IDs we need to pass our user ID. So here we can actually have user ID. So string user ID is equals to main.instance.userinfo.user ID, and we can use that here. And remember that this is an IEnumerator, so we have to start a coroutine for that. So start coroutine, and we have that. So now when we create the items, we're just telling Unity that we are going to use this user ID inside this function that we're going to call from our web class. Right now this is doing nothing. It's simply debugging the items IDs in our console, but nothing useful. What we need to do here is add another parameter in our getItems IDs so that we can continue the function back in our items class. So the next parameter that we're going to add is a system.action type with a string parameter, remember that, and we're going to call it callback. So this callback here is going to go back to items because we're going to supply that here. This items callback is going to be here from the beginning. So we're going to give it to it, create items callback. It's going to be passed to the web class here. So we're passing that callback, and at the end of this function, after we waited for the result from our server, remember that that needs some time, that's why we're using a callback. So after we waited here, we're going to show the results as text, but we're also going to call the callback and pass the parameter, which is a string, so JSON array. Okay, now that we're actually calling the callback from our web class, we're going to actually define what our callback does. So you could just have all your functionality inside this callback, but because I will need to do some waiting, I'm going to start a coroutine that I'm going to create in this class just so I can do some yield return, wait for seconds or something like that. So you could have your functions here, but what I'm going to do first is create an IEnumerator. I'm going to call it create items routine, and we need to have a JSON array string parameter that is the same one that we're going to get from our web class. So we're going to pass it to it here as a string parameter. And I'm going to add a yield return null so I can get rid of this error message. Now here in our callback, we're simply going to start this coroutine. So start coroutine, create items routine, and we're going to pass the JSON array string directly. Alright, so there is several things that we need to do within this function. And there's two main parts. The part that we create the item, where we instantiate our prefab, and also the part where we get the information from our web class and we populate the information in our items. So the first step to do all this is parsing the JSON array as an array. And to do that, it's actually quite simple. We just create a JSON array. We call it JSON array, and it's going to be equals to JSON.parse. We have to pass a string to that, so JSON array string, and it's going to be parsed as a JSON array. Now that we have an array, we can use that array to do a for loop. So for, double tap to create the for loop, and the length is going to be JSON array dot count. That is the number of items that our user has. Inside this for loop, we're going to create a few variables to hold the information of our items and also know if we're done waiting. So create few variables, local variables. We're going to have a boolean called isDone. Are we done downloading? We're also going to create a string that will hold the item ID. So the item ID is equals to JSON array, and we want to get the I member of this array as an object. So as object, And since it's a JSON object, we use the string key to get the value, which in this case is item ID. Now we're getting the item ID from the information that we downloaded previously here in create items callback. So here we have the ID of the current item in our for loop. And we also want to create a JSON object. It's going to be an empty JSON object that then is going to be filled by a callback. So JSON object, I'm going to call it item info JSON equals to new JSON object, like that. Now that we have these variables, we're going to create a callback to get the information from our web class. So this time the callback is going to be created locally. So action is going to have a string as a parameter this time as well. I'm going to call it get item info callback equals, that's the name of the parameter, so something like item info and a lambda expression. Now this callback is going to be called from the web class once that the information of this specific item is downloaded. So we want to tell it that isDone is equals true so that we can continue with the for loop to the next item. So isDone equals true. And we can set it false here as default, but usually they're false as default. So we start with isDone is false, and then once we are actually getting the information from the web class, isDone is equals true. And then that's going to be useful because we're going to have a yield return, wait until this is true. Now I realized that our item information is getting thrown to us as an JSON array because of how we wrote our PHP file. So we're going to create a temporal array, and then we're going to fill this item info JSON from the first element of that array, which is the only element. So JSON array, let's call it temp array, is equals to json.parse item info as JSON array. Because this item info was an array instead of a JSON object that we got from our PHP file. And now since this temporal array has only one value, we can just get the first member and use it to fill this item info JSON. So item info JSON is equals to temp array 0, because it's the first element, dot as object, which is a JSON object. Now this callback, we're just creating it, but we haven't actually run this function yet, remember. All right, now we need to call the function from the web class that is going to download the item info and send it to us through this callback. So in our web class, we're going to have a very similar function to get items IDs. We're just going to copy this, paste it down here, change the name to get item. You could call it get item info, but our PHP file is called get item. Instead of a user ID this time, we're going to use an item ID. So we replace that here, here, and here. And we need to change the URL to our PHP file, which this time is getitem.php. The rest is the same. We're going to debug on our console, and we're going to call the callback that we passed as a parameter into this function. And that's it. Now here we can actually start the coroutine of the web class that will allow us to download the item info. So start coroutine main.instance.web.getItem, and we need to pass the item ID, and we already have that here, so I will copy that, paste it here, and we need to pass a callback as well. Here it is, and we already created that callback inside this coroutine. So get item info callback. So we need to wait until the callback is called from web. Info finish download. So how we do that? Well, we type yield return new wait until. So this is very similar to wait for seconds, But this time we wait until a condition becomes true. So the condition here is done, the variable that we created here and starts as false becomes true. So is done equals true. Now, when this happens, we're going to fall into the next iteration of this for loop. So right here, we got the information of the item, but we haven't created that item yet. We need to instantiate a game object and we need to fill the information based on the item info JSON that we created locally in this for loop. Let's do that. And let me type some more comments. All right, so now here we're going to instantiate our game object. That's also very simple. We know that here we have in our resources folder, we have a folder called prefabs, and inside that we have an item prefab. So we're going to do something very simple. Game object item is equals to instantiate resources dot load, and we give it the path, which is prefabs / item. And this needs to be a game object, so as game object. Now we'll create the prefab and we need to set it to the parent of the items and reset the position and scale. So item.transform.setParent equals this.transform. Why this.transform? Because this script here is already in the items parents. If you remember here, items, we luckily have the mono behavior attached to the same parent in the hierarchy, so we just type this.transform. Now we need to reset the position and the scale, so item.transform.localScale is equals to vector3.1 and item.transform.localPosition is equals to vector3.0. That will create the item prefab for each item that we have. But now, before we go to the next iteration of this loop, we need to fill the information. So fill information down here, and we know that our item has a defined structure. So if we go back to Unity, you will see that our item has a name, a price, and a description. Also an image, but we're not working with the image yet. So I'm simply going to do item.transform.find so that we can find, for example, the name. We know that that is a GUI element, so we're going to go up here and tell Unity, oh no, we already told Unity that we're using the UI library. So if you don't have that, remember to add it. And here, item.transform name dot get component text. All this is text, remember, so we do this. And we change the text to the information that we got from our item info JSON. So here we can type item info JSON and get the name with the key, which is name with all small letters. And we're going to do something very similar for the description and the price. So we just copy these 3 times. We got price, we got description. And here we change these to price, or was it coins? Let me check. And description. Yeah, so I checked and this is all correct. So now after we fill the information, we're simply going to continue to the next item. And we don't need this yellow return null anymore because we already have a yield here. So I told you this function was a little bit long, but it's not too complicated. Just try to read the comments and you will understand what everything does. So now we can actually try this. And if we go back here, let's remove the item that we had originally, because 3 items should be created if we try this. Let's play this. Test user 1 2 3 4 5 6, log in, and there we go. Potion 25 heals your hero for a small amount of HP, oak wood, and a sword, all with different prices. And the image, we're going to change it soon with a very similar concept. So this is awesome. We need to fix the size here. It's a little bit too big when there's fewer words. So let's work on that. I'm going to drag an item here. The maximum size is quite too big. So let's get it to 40. The maximum size should be 20 or 22 or something like that. Apply that, remove this. Now play, test user, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, log in, and there we go. Potion heals your hero, blah, 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 and sort. Very nice. Now we have our items depending on our user, and you have to simply call this function create items here. Now, create items is always using our own user ID, but you could make a parameter string user ID like that, and then you could pass a friend ID to see their items. So that's how we get the items and their information from our server, guys. In the next episodes, we're going to learn how to remove them from here, maybe when we use them or if we sell them to get some money back. And we're going to keep working on all the details of this backend tutorial. Guys, I want to thank you so much for watching. This video was very long, I know that, but it was necessary so that we understand how callbacks work, because we need to wait for our server to reply to us. It's not immediate like what we are used to work with in Unity. So again, guys, thank you so much for watching. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, press the bell, and don't forget to tell your friends about my videos. That really helps me a lot. I will see you all on the next one. Goodbye.